Okay, there we are. Hello, everyone. Heidi here from Rain Country. God is good all the time. Here for another Q&A. And before I get started, I got to remind everyone, since we're live, if I get cut off, just know I have a backup show ready to go. In fact, I linked to it. This time I was smart. I linked to it in the description box down below. It's currently set on private, but you should be able to go right to that link and then I'll make it public. But I think even if you have the link and it's private, I forget to change it to public, you should still be able to get in there and interact. But yeah, so hopefully I have yet to need a backup show. Since I've started doing the backup, having that ready to go, every time I have that ready to go, I haven't had an issue. But then the one I did on Sunday, the short one where I didn't have a backup ready to go, then I got cut off right at the very beginning. Didn't even get anywhere into it. So I just deleted that one and then started over. So yeah, coming at you with another Q&A today. We'll wait a few more minutes. I'll try to start right on time, which is 11:45 my time and whatever 45 your time. So it looks like everybody was indeed behaving, even though they were a little, maybe being a little sly, maybe using a little guile. I'm not sure about you guys. And Darlene, on a Wednesday that early? I mean, I don't know what time it is for you. I know you're on the other side of the states, but you guys have church that early on a Wednesday? Because I'm thinking it's got to be afternoon. Maybe it's early evening. That seems pretty early. I don't know. I'm on to you. I see I got all my regulars here. So we got Deb and Tammy and Darlene and Linda. Who else is in here? I think there's a couple other people, but more will be coming in. I see Paula and Diane, Denise. Hello. Hopefully they're still here. Vicky, Deanna, and I won't keep reading off all the names. I know that gets irritating for people who are coming in here to watch, especially in the replay. But I know people like it when I say hi to them, like Annabeth that just came in. So, she's working though. Okay. Yeah, we've got, you meet at 6:00. Have to have, boy, must be. Okay. I guess I'm getting it. Because I'm thinking the latest you can be from us would be a 3-hour difference. That's why I was like, But yeah, unfortunately, for those who have a hard time with this time, it is the best time for me during the day. I got to try to do it in the mid part of the day when my vocal cords aren't too terribly wore out, even though I've shot 2 videos earlier today. I try to shoot them as early in the morning as I can to give my vocal cords a rest. Today is not a good day for my vocal cords. They are not happy with me again today. So I'm hoping I can hold out for an hour. And then also just working around my other things. And then Wednesday and Sunday currently being the only days I can do this. Let's see. Next Wednesday, though, I probably won't be going live. I wasn't sure about today, but I decided to put off going in there and taking care of that business until next Wednesday. So I won't be going live next Wednesday. I don't think I can make up for it on Thursday because I'll probably have a grandbaby here. It's been kind of touch and go with that one. Right now, his mom's really sick. So she's just been keeping him and her at home. So I haven't watched him since Saturday. I feel like I haven't seen him in forever. And then my other two, right now I'm only watching them once a week since she's no longer working outside the home. And so I watch them once a week. So that not only gives us time with them at least once a week, but gives her time to get other stuff done. Well, they were really sick. So there's some nasty flu bug going on around here, just all over. And that's what's happening. So what are some of your favorite fruits to ferment? Gosh, I don't do a lot of fruit fermenting unless I'm making a wine or a natural soda, and then it just depends on what's available. Or I'm making vinegar, and that is anything. I make vinegar out of anything. So I don't typically make fruit just to eat it like whole fruit fermented. Once in a great while, I'll do that. It's just not my very favorite thing. When it comes to making something to just eat, it's going to be vegetables, and 99% of the time, it's going to be kimchi. And anything else that I ferment that is not a fruit is just something like onions and garlic just to keep them on hand. Sometimes pickles. Sometimes I'll do pickles, but then it's usually a cucumber kimchi anyway. Sorry. Anyway, like I said, my vocal cords and all that are just not off to a good start today. They've been a little rough all day. Oh, you meant vinegar. I don't really, when it comes to the fruit vinegars, I don't really have a favorite. It's just, like I said, it's just depending on what I have a lot of scraps of. If I don't buy a lot of fresh pineapple, but when I do, I'll make pineapple vinegar out of the rinds. In the summer, if I'm canning peaches, I'll make peach vinegar out of the skins of that. Let's see. Now, obviously, apples, because we get lots of apples. I don't typically make a blackberry vinegar. I've done it before, but it's a good vinegar. I don't like using it because it's so dark. It's really dark and it stains. So I like to save the blackberries for making jams and pies and turnovers and that kind of stuff. Patrick just picked up some organic bananas from the store, so I'll be making banana peel vinegar shortly. It makes a really good vinegar. It was funny because years ago, I was reading somebody's blog about making vinegars years ago, before I got real serious into making my own. And they were saying that they were making vinegar out of some different stuff, and they tried banana peel vinegar and it was terrible. And they said, don't ever do it again. And so I didn't. And then I thought, you know what? I'm just going to try this for myself. And I did. And I was like, this is good vinegar. Why was this person not happy with it? Oh, I just realized it's time to start. Well, that's okay. We're talking about fermenting anyway. And that is one of the topics, talking about storing the ferments. So I'm not going to feel bad about talking about that and being a little late. So the question is, how do you store your ferments? Well, you know what? That's going to be a matter of choice. And to me, it also is going to depend on what it is. I mean, obviously, my vinegars and my wines, I jar or bottle them up nice and tight, airtight. That's really important. If you don't want your wine to turn to vinegar, it needs to be airtight. If you don't want your vinegar to turn to nasty water, it needs to be airtight. And those get stored in my pantry. Now, when it comes to other types of ferments like the natural sodas, which is basically just almost like wine, but only fermented for a few days. It doesn't taste like wine. It's the same basic principle. But anyway, I keep those in the fridge because I want to drink them chilled. Eggs, I typically keep my fermented eggs in the fridge. Oh, that was the other food one that I forgot. Maybe 99% of the time for kimchi isn't right, because I do love fermenting hard-boiled eggs. When I got that time of year, which we're getting into that time of year where we're getting a lot of eggs coming in. And I love them. I love them better than regular hard-boiled eggs. They're not like pickled eggs. They're not sour. They're just better. They're just better than plain hard-boiled eggs, especially if you're adding spices and stuff to the water when you're fermenting it. But the eggs, especially, I typically will keep stored in the fridge. The kimchis, no matter what kind of kimchi it is. It's not always necessary, especially with your fruits, vegetables, and whatnot, to keep them in the fridge. But you're going to want to keep them in the coolest area you can. And here's why I don't like keeping a lot of that stuff out. The eggs in particular, I just feel better once I've let them ferment for 3 to 5 days and they're where I want them. I like to keep them in the fridge. I feel better about that. But with the kimchi and all that, it's more about I don't want that stuff bubbling over in my pantry and then making a mess because I've had it happen. And like with, I think I said this maybe last week when I'm making extracts using my homemade vinegar, but maybe the vinegar or my homemade wine, and maybe those are still just a little bit fizzy when I go to use them. And then they'll still kind of bubble out from under the jar lid and just make a sticky mess all over in there. And I hate that. Where I had just like the worst mess in I have a metal cabinet that I put a lot of my infusions in, my extracts, my infused oils, and, my vinegars also are in there, but I have 2 shelves where a lot of my extracts are infusing, and those got so nasty from stuff bubbling over. So I'm trying to make sure I pay attention to what I'm using and making sure it's not fizzy still to where it's going to bubble over and make a big mess in there because we just finally got everything pulled out and got a lot of that sticky mess cleaned out of there, but it's terrible. And this is why I prefer to keep my ferments in the fridge because they're less likely to boil. They're less likely to bubble over. The colder you can keep them, the less chance there is of that happening. But it's not necessary to keep them cold for them to stay preserved because the fermenting process is what actually preserves them in the first place. So, and then the other thing too is by chilling your ferments, if you've got it right where you want it, you like just how it is, chilling it's going to prevent it. Like I say, it's a sauerkraut or a kimchi, and you've got the flavor right where you want it. Keeping it cold is going to keep it from getting more sour or something like that. It's still going to keep fermenting, but it slows the process way, way down. So yeah, that's that's how I store my various ferments depending on what they are. Okay, let me go on. I'm going to try to get through all my questions, and then if I'm still here and they haven't cut me off, then I'll see if there's any other questions in the chat I can approach. If not, I can do them on my next Q&A. Okay, so somebody had asked if flatbread, so Sunday show I was talking about grains, milling, et cetera, et cetera. Somebody had asked if flatbread was like pita bread. Well, pita bread is a flatbread. I don't think there's any kind of leaven used in pita bread, but a flatbread comes in all varieties. The flatbread is just a general term, meaning any bread that hasn't had yeast, it's not a sourdough, or hasn't had any kind of baking powder or other type of leavening agent added to it. It's flat. Thus, it's called a flatbread. So even pancakes, even though they're typically flat, they're not, they usually have baking powder in because you want them fluffy, right? So that wouldn't be considered a flatbread, even though it's flat. But it has leavening agent in it. So things like tortillas, as long as you're omitting baking powder, some people use baking powder, and I've used baking powder in my tortilla for years. And I'm like, why am I doing this? And I stopped using it because it's like it doesn't make any sense. It's a flat bread. It's supposed to be flat. I think the baking powder adds to it, kind of getting more of that bubbliness to it as you're cooking it. You know how it kind of gets the bubbles. But I tried it without the baking powder. It still does it anyway, so it's not necessary. It really doesn't matter. Okay, so pita does have yeast. I wondered. That's what makes the pocket. Okay, thank you, Deb. I wondered about that. I didn't, because I haven't had pita in so long. I'm talking, gosh, it could be as much as 40 years ago last time I had pita bread, but at least 35, at least that long. So I don't even remember what the texture is like. I just know it has a pocket in it. That's all I know. So at any rate, yeah. So no, flatbread and pita bread are not the same thing, even though pita can be flat, just like the pancakes. So yeah. Anyway, if you watched my live from last Sunday, or you see my this and that coming up this Monday, I do link to my flatbreads video I did last year. So that's for the sake if you're wanting some kind of cracker bread, just some different ideas for either Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread, or just for the sake of preparedness and something that's quick and simple, and you don't want to have to worry about yeast, sourdough, baking powder, or anything like that. It can have many purposes. I'm really looking forward to making my cracker bread recipe. I should just make it anyway and then make it again and again, because I made a lot of that last year. So then somebody else asked several times, and I didn't see the comment, sorry, until after the show was over. That's why I say put your questions in all caps. So especially if I miss it during the live, it's something I can go back and easily find when I do another Q&A video and address it then. But somebody had asked what the best cut was for making jerky. Well, when it comes to jerky is a hard and chewy anyway. So it doesn't, in my personal opinion, it doesn't matter a whole lot. I just use whatever's there, whatever's available, whatever I have a lot of. The more tender it is, the easier it will be to eat even when it's dried, but it's still going to be hard and chewy. So I like to use roasts because I can just get a whole roast and then just cut it up thin and into however many pieces I want or whatever size I want. And then I marinate it. And I should have thought to link to the video I did and then remastered recently on making jerky. I was making, I think, elk jerky that time and making up 2 different recipes and trying them both. So anyway, you can find that on my main channel if you want to find my video on making jerky. But making jerky is not the same thing as just dehydrating meat where you want it light and crisp. So I cover this a lot because I feel like that's one of these things I need to get out there as much as possible. If you're not wanting a hard, chewy, jerky type meat, but you're wanting to dehydrate your chicken, your turkey, your beef, your elk, whatever, and you want it to be light and crisp, where it's something you can throw into casseroles, into soups, and it's not going to stay chewy no matter how long you cook it, then it's as simple as this. It turns out more like freeze-dried meats without having to have the cost of a freeze dryer. You just take that meat, like I'll cook up a turkey, cook up a chicken, cook up a roast or corned beef. This is corned beef season. So you cook it up, then you eat on it that night. Then you can take whatever you're not going to use right away for making maybe another meal like whole cannon or whatever, and then freeze it. And then once you've done that, let it freeze entirely, leave it in there for a few days at least. But make sure you've cut it up first. Make sure you cut it up into the sizes you want it first, or broken it up into the sizes you want it. Then get it out of the freezer. You only have to let it thaw just enough where you can spread it on your trays, and then you dehydrate it. That process of cooking and then freezing makes all the difference in the world of going from being a really chewy meat and being a light, crisp meat. And then the same applies, if you have meats that you've pressure canned, you don't even have to do the freezing process because the pressure canning does the same thing. You just take, thank you, Deb. You just take you have a jar of pressure canned beef, pressure canned fish, pressure canned chicken or turkey, whatever it is. Just take that out, dump out your excess liquid, use it in a broth or something, and then spread that meat out on your dehydrating racks, and it will turn out the same way as if you had cooked and frozen it, because it's already been cooked, and then in the process, right, while it's pressure canning, and then the pressure canning just really breaks that meat down the same way a freezer does, the freezing it. But again, it has to be, with the freezing thing, it has to be cooked first. You can't take raw meat out of the freezer and then cut it up and dehydrate it and expect it to turn out light and crisp. It still has to be cooked, frozen, then dehydrated. Even if it was previously frozen, you have to thaw it, cook it, freeze it again, and then dehydrate it. So yeah. Okay, but as far as the cut of meat, it doesn't really matter, in my personal opinion. Now, some people may have their own opinions on that, but I've just used whatever, just whatever. So I store the dehydrated meats. Remember, people, put your questions in all caps. It makes them easier for me to spot. Sometimes I happen to see them anyway, but especially if I miss them during the live, because then I'll just skim through there. And what I look for in the questions, I look for anything that's in all caps. I'll probably completely bypass it if it's not in caps when I'm going to find more questions. So I vacuum seal once all my stuff is fully dried and then fully cooled to room temperature. I vacuum seal into jars. And in this case, I prefer to use a brake bleeder pump and my food saver tops. On my main channel, you'll find all kinds of videos where I'm showing how to do that. It's a super simple process. In fact, I have a video on dehydrating meats, storing and using them. And in that, I either talk about or show how to vacuum seal, how I store them. All right. So, okay, I'm going to read, this wasn't a question, but it cracked me up because I didn't see it during the live, but it was something Tyler said. And he's always a goofball. Somebody had asked what grains I thought were lowest in carbs. Now, I'm not sure about that, but some of you who were there might have saw that. Tyler's answer was gunpowder is measured in grains and it would be low in carbs. What a smarty pants. I just thought it was so hilarious. I wanted to go ahead and read it in case people missed it. That was pretty darn funny. So I like having Tyler in here when he can make it because, he's just so hilarious. Yep, that would definitely be low in carbs. Might have a little bit of an explosive action, but it would be low in carbs. All right, then I had somebody else come in and saw this old video I did on soaking grains and why I did it. Now, I got to touch on this one because I don't soak my grains and dry them anymore. It's just a couple of extra steps that for us, I found absolutely pointless. I did it for a while. So what I would do is I'd take the whole grains. I'm talking mostly like my wheat grains I would use for making bread. I would soak them for about 24 hours in a jar with a splash of vinegar in there, homemade, of course. And then the next day I would take those, strain them out, spread them out either on a stoneware cookie sheet that I dry on my wood stove or dry in my electric dehydrators, depending on the time of the year. Then I would take those grains and I would grind them up for flour. Now, then you can also go the extra step, the added step of sprouting your grains and then drying them and then grinding them up for flour. Now, I absolutely believe that for a lot of people, that has been a really good answer for those. Maybe it's those people that have issues with gluten, but it's other things than that too. But people who just have a hard time with grains find that either simply soaking the grains first and then using those to make your breads. Obviously, you can't grind them while they're wet. They're going to grind better once they're dried. Or then going the extra mile and then sprouting them, drying them, and then making the bread. They find that they have no problems with grains. They just, no issues. Well, we don't have problems with grains anyway. So it's just, I tried it for a while. I did it for, I think, about a year, maybe 2 years. I was doing that. And then I realized, you know what? I've not noticed any difference between doing that and just using the good organic grains and grinding them up and using them fresh. I personally noticed no difference. So that's why I don't do it anymore, because with my time being as precious as it is, I just don't see the need to add the extra step. But if you're one who has sensitivities to grains, consider giving it a try. It might be helpful, because I've had a lot of people tell me that's just been the trick for them. Since you dry them after soaking, how long can you keep them before milling? Tammy, that's a good question. I'm really not sure. I would assume they would keep just as long as any other grain. I think in this, I would just usually grind them up right away and use them. But um, I would assume that if you vacuum sealed them into jars, or if you're doing a ton of them, sealed up really well into Mylar in a bucket, they'd probably keep just as long. But I wouldn't do that. I would just maybe keep them in a jar and just do it enough like I did before, just do what I needed to at a time. So obviously you have to be a day or two ahead on it if you're doing it that way, always being ahead. So like if you're making bread all the time, you might need to be soaking a jar of grains every day, and every day have those grains another jar that, while you're soaking one, you've got another jar that's drying for the day, and then you have more that are ready to use immediately. So if you're making like me, I'm kind of to the point now where now that I've got more time, I'm back to doing like my yeast spreads and that kind of thing, maybe twice a week instead of just once a week. And so that would be something I'd have to make sure I had enough of that, at least twice, 2 times in the week, I was soaking and drying out the grains to have them ready to mill up. So, okay, let's move on. And I got a couple more. And this is one I get a lot. So much so that I try to remember to say this whenever I'm talking about using my homemade wine to make extracts and other things. I get a lot of people say, well, can I use store-bought? Yes. Yes, you can use store-bought. Sometimes I just say my homemade wine, part of it just rolls off my tongue because it's just what I do. But the thing that, and I also throw that out there too, is so people know you can make your own wine. It's really easy and it's better for you. It's healthier than what you're going to buy in the store. So that's the other thing that people need to know is if you all you need is a few things like a glass jug or a carboy, an airlock. Well, even a balloon will work. I still recommend investing in a couple of airlocks because they're cheap. So it's not really even that much of an investment. $3 a piece if you're buying them individually, or maybe $6 for a set of 3 of them. And then maybe some kind of long tube. You can actually, in fact, I finally just bought myself one of these. I'm going to try it. Hope it works better. You just need some kind of long tube for siphoning it out when you go to rack it so you can get as few sediments in there once it's done. But it's super simple and what's in there. So your store-bought wines are going to have a lot of additives in them. So they add clarifiers. That's how they always get such crystal clear wines, because they use clarifiers. I never use clarifiers. I never have. In fact, it wasn't until in the past few years I learned, oh, that's how they get it so clear. They use clarifiers, because I've had some wine and mead turn out super clear by repeated racking, but it doesn't always turn out that way. A lot of times it will still stay cloudy and it's no big deal. But what happens with clarifiers is that it binds all the stuff in the wine and helps it to settle to the bottom, and that way you can end up with it crystal clear. And I stopped worrying about it, and I've still never used clarifiers, but there are natural ones that can be used. Like I've heard of people using bentonite clay, because that apparently binds all that stuff that's floating around there that gives it the cloudy look. But it's all good stuff that's in there. It's not going to hurt you. So as long as it tastes good or it's strong enough for me to use for my extracts, that's all that matters. But do whole portobello mushrooms dehydrate well? Personally, I would never, ever, ever try to dehydrate a whole mushroom without slicing it up first. They will dehydrate great if you slice them up, but I would never dehydrate any mushroom whole. There's especially a portobello because they're so massive. So the thing is that somebody was just telling me that they were dehydrating whole mushrooms, and they weren't even portobellos. I think they're just regular mushrooms. And they were drying them by hanging them and putting them in a paper bag to dry. And when they took them out, they were like all hard, like like gravel. And how would you then be able to cut them up and all that? So sliced mushrooms always. And a lot of mushrooms, it depends on the type of mushroom. Some will dehydrate, even slices, they'll be kind of hard and maybe take a lot to really rehydrate. But others rehydrate beautifully. You don't need them to be freeze dried to be able to powder them. Like like I was talking about, the little brown and white mushrooms that are most commonly found in your grocery store. Those dehydrate up without any, they're just very light. They rehydrate easily. You can powder them if you want. Why can't you send me cash? I'm not sure I don't know. Are you talking about, if you're talking about on the chat? Oh, well, I guess I can't see it. I won't be able to see it the same way you do, but the little gift thing should be on there. But that's interesting. I don't know if that's what you're talking about. So, and Joni, I know you're the one that usually is sending me some kind of what do you call it? What is it called? Super chat. Maybe my super chat's off. I guess I'm gonna have to check my settings next time. So, at any rate, what's going on here? I got the stupid ABG popping up, trying to get me to buy more crud. All right, let me get to. I have one more question, and it's not really a question. So it was one of the things I put in the title because I wanted to share this. If you guys follow me on like some of my other social media, like I don't do this Facebook page a whole awful lot. I tend to forget about it a lot. But Instagram and X are two of the main ones I use to post things. Whether it be a meme or just a picture of what I'm doing today, or maybe a little short of some kind. Well, the other day, I saw this going around on, in the local Facebook group where, I heard there's this horrible storm coming on Monday and blah, blah, blah. And people were starting to kind of freaking out. And, I'm not seeing anything in my phone app in the weather thing. Well, then on Sunday, it showed, this big, scary, scary thing about this windstorm that was coming. And, and it even it says severity, and then, it could say not severe or whatever. And it says severe, and then danger of, let's see, what did it say? Danger of loss of life and property damage. And I'm like, okay, so they're scaring the pants off of people over some windstorm that's really common, especially this time of year. And then you go on to read it, and it's talking about, what to expect, trees getting blown down and power outages. Yeah, like happens all the time. And then you scroll down a little bit farther, because I did take a screenshot of this and circled a couple of things, circled the one in red where it was talking about severe and how scary, scary, scary. And at the bottom, I circled the part where it said what to do. And I'm just like, this has got to be the dumbest thing. So first they're going to scare the pants off of everyone. Then they're going to turn around and tell them to just, make sure you're prepared according to the description being trees getting blown over, blown down, and power outages. And I'm sitting there thinking how stupid that is, because especially where we live, and I know I've said this before, there's a lot of people around here that, despite the fact we get a plethora of power outages all through the year, especially through the winter, it's dumb to me that people around here aren't prepared for power outages. But I mean, mainly that's what they're telling you to be prepared for, are the power outages. And well, obviously just, watching out for, don't be out in the weather. If you got to drive into Port Angeles or something, there might be some downed trees or some whatever, obviously. But again, these are things that happen all the time around here. So yeah, Tammy, it's just the constant, it just made me roll my eyes. How stupid it was. And I'm like, so all they're doing is they're telling people to do what they should always be doing. when you live in an area like this that has frequent power outages. You should always be doing that stuff. You should always be prepared. You should always have some kind of backup light source and cook source. I mean, even if you can't afford to buy a generator or have solar power, especially solar power, because that's a pretty big expense, at least a camp stove or a barbecue so you have something to cook on and have some food on hand because you may not be able to make it to the store. It's not hard. It doesn't have to be scary, scary. I mean, I think the worst part for me is just, okay, what could possibly get damaged this time around? We haven't suffered a lot of damage from windstorms around here, other than the year we lost a good chunks of our roof and our stupid insurance company wouldn't help us. So we had to put on a whole new roof and foot the bill ourselves. But that's another story about what a scam insurance is. But anyway, 30 years paying in. Okay, I'm not going to keep talking about that. So we don't have it anymore. I'll say that much. And there was a ladder that Patrick has had propped up against the house for crawling up there, cleaning out the chimney. And a lot of times he just leaves it there. It's on the backside of the property and it's usually not an issue. It's a pretty heavy ladder. And I said, is it possible that ladder could get blown down? He goes, no, I think it'll be okay. And I'm like, okay. Well, the next morning it did blow down. The windstorm did hit, but it took about 4 or 5 hours for it to finally hit us. And it was no different than any other windstorm that we get throughout the winter. It's no, it's like that. What was it, a couple months ago where I didn't even know anything about it until people were emailing me. It's like, oh, I heard you have a bomb cyclone coming your way. And I'm like, what? A bomb? I never even heard of that. Never even heard of that. So I get to look and I'm like, ooh, okay, that sounds kind of terrifying. Never heard of one like that before. It was just another windstorm, like any other windstorm. Now, I don't mean to say that we shouldn't take the warnings and go, oh, okay, well, maybe I should double check and make sure that everything's battened down. We got things tied down. We don't have ladders leaning up against the house so that they can get blown down. My biggest concern is I knew if it went this way or that way, it wasn't going to hurt anything. But what if it fell just right and then went through a window or something? That was what made me concerned, but it didn't happen, thankfully. But yeah, I mean, obviously, it's good to have warnings so you can go, oh, okay, well, maybe today wouldn't be a good day to drive to Port Angeles and then get stuck in traffic because there's a tree that or 2 or 3 that have been blown down going around the lake and there's no way around it. And this is one of the reasons I decided not to take care of that today, is just in case there's still, because I heard there was a mudslide and whatever going on. And, I'm pretty sure by now they have it cleaned up. But I'm like, let's just wait till next week to go take care of that stuff. So, yeah, anyway, so I reposted it on my Facebook page, and of course, my Facebook profile, not my page, and just said, this is just silly. First scare the pants off of everyone and then turn around and give them the only solution is for them to do what they should have been doing all along anyway, with all the massive power outages we have, all the windstorms we have. Hello? And guess what? Our power never went out after all. So all this fear mongering. Yeah. So let me repeat myself. I'm not saying we shouldn't heed that. Oh, thank you, Joni. You found it. It is still there. Well, at least that shows me it is still working. Thank you, Joni. I appreciate that. You're always so kind. LOL. But I mean, yeah, and we should just go, okay, well, that's good to know that's coming. Let me check to see if I've got any holes in my preparedness, because maybe I used up a lot of something that, went through a lot of something. Do I still have a lot of that something on hand, or should I go run to the store now and make sure that I'm okay? Make sure I got a little bit more, whether it be your clean heat, which is what I like to use in our oil lamps. Well, those aren't oil lamps, but I prefer using clean heat in those rather than kerosene. Or if it's, fuel for your generator or whatever, or for your barbecue, or, some propane. We have propane, or briquettes, whatever, right? Just whatever. It's always good to just kind of double check to make sure that that you're covered, but not to live in fear. I mean, that's part of the reason why we do what we do, is so we don't have to live in fear of everything, especially when they're screaming at us about bomb cyclones and killer winds. I mean, it was to the point that Patrick, every time I needed to go outside, he's like, watch out for them killer winds. We were joking around about that. And, so I went out to shut the chickens up, and the chickens are still running around. It's evening. And so I'm like, okay, I'm not going to try to hurt them up. I'm just going to go back inside, wait another 10 minutes, and they should all be in there so I can shut them in. So, I'm joking around about, okay, my chickens just put my life at risk twice because I had to go out in the scary, scary wind. Anyway, I'm sorry. I'm being really, really sarcastic. But it just, that's the thing that I think probably irritates me more than anything, is seeing people from any side. It doesn't matter if they're preparedness minded people or non-preparedness minded people. Somebody's always wanting to scare the pants off you about something, and then never have any real solutions other than what's just basic common sense in the first place. It's like, just practice common sense. You won't have to worry about it. I mean, most things. Obviously, there's certain natural disasters and whatnot that we can never, ever fully be prepared for, large life events. But you still want to do the best you can. And speaking of that, this reminded me of something else that was just said today on the video that published on my main channel today, where somebody was talking about, and I've seen people say this a lot, that, well, sadly, you just can't trust organic, and I get that. I totally understand. I'm not saying anything against the person that said that. But what bothers me about this is that, does that mean that we stop trying? Just so, it's the same idea. Do we stop trying to do the best we can to get our hands on as organic and non-GMO food as possible, be it stuff that we're purchasing from places like Azure Standard, that I trust more than any other company when it comes to food, or the stuff that we grow ourselves? But even the stuff we grow ourselves, we cannot fully control what's falling from the sky. So does that mean we stop trying and then just go to the store and start buying a bunch of processed junk that's all, loaded with chemicals and garbage? No, of course. Same thing with, or of course not. Of course we don't do that. Same thing goes with being prepared for storms and for hard life situations. There will be things you will never be fully prepared for, no matter how much of an expert you think you are. You will never fully be prepared for certain life events. But does that mean you stop trying and stop doing the best you can? Obviously not. Obviously not. Because even if it helps at least a little bit, it's still a little bit. It's still something. And in most cases, it will help you weather the basic storms of life, be they real storms or storms that you're suffering internally, or, emotionally because of loss of life or family stress or whatever's going on. So I'm assuming the frozen egg question is about dehydrating them. Now, I've assumed you could and it'd be fine, but Deb's saying frozen eggs, the texture will not be the same. Now, are we talking about dehydrating frozen eggs, like eggs that you'd blended up and then froze? Because I missed some of that, and I'm sorry. I guess I could scroll up. The worst I've ever experienced, apocalyptic for real and cereal. I'm sorry. I'm confused. I don't know if this is typo or if I'm just not understanding. Okay, there's the question on, can I use eggs? Let's see. It's a way of, I can't do anything if I'm not told to be prepared. Don't want you thinking for yourself. Right. Right. Okay, anyway, sorry. Let me scroll back down, see if someone answered. Yes, frozen eggs. I've used frozen eggs for baking. Now, here's the deal with frozen eggs. I've tried like several different ways of freezing scrambled eggs. The ones that lasted the longest and turned out best were the ones that I froze in food saver bags. Even though I don't do that anymore, they seem like they did the best. I tried doing the breast milk bags because somebody told me those would be best. No. Um, but regardless, no matter what you do with your frozen eggs, use them within a year or up to a year. Past a year, I don't care if they're frozen in glass jars. Like I tried, I thought, okay, glass jars must be the answer. Maybe it's the plastic from the food saver bags or the breast milk bags. It's something about the frozen eggs. If you leave them in there for over a year, by the second year at least, they're nasty. They taste terrible. So what I would find myself doing is taking all those eggs and scrambling or cooking them up, they're already scrambled, and giving them to the dogs and the chickens because they did not taste good. They're fine within the year or up to a year at least. They're fine. They scramble, they cook up beautifully. I've used them in bacon. I've actually found that the frozen eggs like that work best in mayonnaise, making homemade mayonnaise. They seem to thicken the mayonnaise up better than fresh eggs. So that now is the only reason I like to keep a few jars of mayonnaise, a few jars of, if you get the little quarter pint jars, they're 4-ounce jars. You can put 2 eggs in there. And I like to keep a few jars like that in the freezer for if I'm wanting to make mayonnaise during the time of the year my chickens are resting and not laying, and I don't have any young enough that are still laying through the season. I mean, last couple of winters, I've had eggs all year round, but obviously just not as many during the winter. I've had my eggs freeze in the back of the spare fridge. Oh, you're talking about like whole eggs that have got frozen in the shell. Yeah, those are totally fine. You can use those for anything. I just wouldn't let them sit for too long. I just try to use them right away. So I don't know if that was the question. She said her friend. Okay, okay, I see. And you guys are on top of it anyway, answering questions and responding to each other. And this is what makes this community so great. Have you already talked about dehydrating fresh eggs today? I don't think that wasn't on my I haven't, other than what I was just talking about, but that wasn't on my itinerary, but I can. Since I'm actually done with all the points and I'm just going to stay a little bit longer, but my vocal cords are starting to get pretty sore and rough, so I'll probably have to get off here soon. However, I haven't even been on here an hour though, so I can hang on for a while longer. I have a video on my main channel on dehydrating eggs, how I do it, and why I keep them raw, and how I use them, and how I store them. All that's covered in the one video. It's probably about a 20-25 minute video because I'm covering a lot of things. Sorry. Like I said, the vocal cord thing. Getting sore, getting inflamed. I can feel them starting to swell up in there. It's the nodules. I finally, a couple of years ago, I'll get back to the eggs. Finally got to looking at pictures of what nodules look like. After all these years of having them, I've never looked at pictures. And I finally thought I should see what those look like. I guess I never knew what they look like. And I'm like, oh, there's just like one on each side. And then the more they swell, the more rough your voice gets and the more sore it gets. But they're always there unless you have them surgically removed, which I won't do. I won't bother because they could still come back. It's not worth it. So, and besides, I don't know. There's a lot of things I just don't trust anymore. So dehydrating the eggs. So let me preface this on the fact that people almost always, I'll get at least 1 or 2 people that will freak out about the fact that I'm keeping the eggs as raw as possible. So then I have to turn around. oh, you got to dry them, higher than that to kill the salmonella. It's like, I don't want to dry them hotter than 115 degrees. I mean, you probably could go higher than that, but I go 115 degrees. It takes about 12 hours ish for them to get fully dry. And I want them to stay raw. That's the point. They're going to work better when you're cooking them up for scrambled eggs. Keywords, cooking them. When you go to make scrambled eggs, you're cooking them. And then here's the other thing. When you go to bake cookies or some quick bread, you're making zucchini bread or pumpkin bread, or you're making pancakes. Do you cook up an egg? Do you scramble the egg and cook it in a pan and then throw that scrambled egg into your breads, cookies, and whatnot? Cakes? No, absolutely not. Duh. You want the eggs raw, because the purpose of the eggs and all these things is to give it a binder to help hold everything together. And it needs to be raw when it goes into the mix. Because guess what? You're going to cook or bake it anyway. So it's nothing to be afraid of. I just don't worry about it anyway. I still eat raw cookie dough. I love raw cookie dough. I don't make cookies that much because I do like my cowboy cookies quite a bit. And I especially love the raw cookie dough. And I'm not afraid of it. I've eaten raw cookie dough and raw cake batter and whatever else since I was a little girl. Never once got salmonella. Doesn't mean it can't happen, but I just think we're coming back to the fear mongering again. So anyway, just pour them onto my silicone trays that go into my dehydrators back here. Okay, I've got silicone trays that I can use for any liquid items, be it milk, broth, soup, eggs, tomatoes, because I puree the tomatoes before I dehydrate them. And then once they're dry, I just powder them up and keep them in a jar and then use them as necessary. Now, I will say the jar that I've had open for several years in the kitchen cabinet that wasn't vacuum sealed, the last time I made scrambled eggs out of them, they didn't quite taste the same. They don't smell bad or taste rotten. It's not that. They just don't taste right. But that jar also did not stay vacuum sealed. So I'm just going to use up the rest of that. I'll either just go ahead and scramble up the rest of that jar and feed it to the dogs and chickens, or just use it in baking. Like I used some in making the pancakes when Jace was here on Saturday. Because the last Saturday of the month, I watched Jace. And so I make it a point to make pancakes for him. So I decided to use some of the egg powder instead of using a fresh egg because I want to get it used up. Threw in some pumpkin powder in there as well. I try to get a lot of good stuff in there, threw in some seeds like chia and poppy. So he's getting a lot of good, healthy stuff in there. And I made it entirely whole grain since it was pancake, using the barley and the hard white wheat mix that I make. Again, getting all my grains from Measure Standard. So, and that was another question someone had. I forgot to address. Somebody asked if I use the pearl barley. No, I don't. I just use the regular barley, but I do make sure I get the hulled barley. The organic non-GMO hulled barley through Azure Standard is $15 a bag for 25 pounds. Excuse me, for 25 pounds. That is such a good deal. That's cheaper than the hard white wheat. I'd get a 50-pound bag if they had it, but for some reason the barley, they only carry it as big, at least last I looked, as a 25-pound bag. And so I'm ordering up some more of that on my next order, which is going to be, I've actually sent the order in, but I've got till March 10th. So it's going to be delivered in our own little remote town. I'm so glad I don't have to pay shipping. Yay! We just got to go through the trouble to go pick it up instead of having it delivered to our door, but it's in town. It's only like a mile away from us. Yay! So thrilled about this. So let's see. Somebody asked another question. I loved when I found your video a few years ago about dehydrating raw eggs. It's been great. I no longer need to water glass and take up a bunch of room. We have a lot of chickens, LOL. Right. And I have nothing against water glassing. My friend did that with some of her eggs to try it, and she worked through those eggs for the whole year. And I know that they get watery over time. But the thing is, if you leave the bloom on your eggs anyway, and you live in a cool climate like we do, well, the chickens usually stop laying fall-ish, around in there, late fall. And you only need them to last for a few months. And eggs with the bloom still on them, if you just, you don't wash them, you just keep them stored in the coolest part of your home, which is usually easy to find in the wintertime, and they will last easily through the winter that way. So there's really no need to even water glass and go through that trouble. And they'll be just the same. Because I know the water glass eggs, the longer they sit, the more the eggs get kind of watery. They'll still cook up fine, but the same will happen with the unwashed eggs if kept in a cool place. Some people who have root cellars and stuff, they'll do that. They'll store them in places like that. I usually don't keep that kind. I just find I like dehydrating because it saves it so much space. And then, yeah. And I usually like to have them all washed up and ready to go, because sometimes I'll have someone I want to give them to or sell them to. But I usually wash up a bunch and just keep them on hand. I'll have as much as, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, maybe 8 dozen at a time. But then if I get that many, maybe more. But once I get to that many, I'm like, okay, I need somebody to start buying eggs. And if nobody's needing to buy eggs, then I'll give them to family, or I'll dehydrate them, or I'll hard boil them and make fermented eggs, because I love that. So, question: why do you prefer the mixed barley and hard wheat? So I did actually cover this in my live show on Sunday that you can find, but I'll go ahead and say it quickly. For 2 reasons. One is it makes a good all-purpose flour. So your bread flours are, for like yeast breads, are typically going to be hard grains, like hard white, hard red. Don't like red, so I don't use red. I don't like the flavor of it. Where your flours for making things like biscuits, pie crusts, turnovers, more delicate things, even cookies, typically it's going to be a soft wheat or a soft grain, and barley is a soft grain, where your all-purpose flours are typically a mix. So I just make my own mix that does 2 things. It makes a good all-purpose flour, and it makes it so much easier and faster for grinding into a flour, having the blend, because the softer grains make it easier to turn. The harder grains helps it go through cleaner and faster. It's kind of hard to explain it unless you're actually grinding the grains yourself. But this is something I learned. And on top of the fact that barley is going to have certain nutrients and benefits that the wheat's not going to have, and vice versa. So you're getting this nice blend of both. So yeah, that's why I like that. And I've experimented with other things. Like one time I bought barley and didn't realize, not barley, buckwheat, to add to my flour, and didn't realize you had to make sure you got well, you don't have to, but I didn't know about making sure you're getting hulled buckwheat, just like the hulled barley. And I'm like, oh man. So I was just throwing, so might see a picture where you're looking down into my grain mill until the hopper, and you'll see little black things. That was the buckwheat that was not hulled, but I went ahead and just ground it up. It didn't hurt anything. You can eat the hulls. They're not going to hurt you. They just add, they just make kind of odd speckly colors in there. Question: is it safe to dehydrate store-bought pastured or organic free-range eggs? Well, as is, no, because most likely when you're buying them, they've been washed. So those, and if I remember correctly, water glass eggs, you don't want those washed either. You just want clean eggs in there, ones that don't have chicken poop on them or whatever, and you brush off the straw or whatever that might be stuck to them. But store-bought eggs, or, if you're buying them from a farm and they're not washing them, that will be fine for storing as is in a cool place or water glassing. But if you're buying them from the store, they're going to be washed, and you don't want a water glass or store as is. Those would be better for freezing, or which remember you got to use up within within a year, or dehydrating. If you're storing them, you can also boil them and ferment them. They'll last quite a while in the fridge fermented. Just want to make sure they're really well fermented. And they got some salt in there too, because that's going to help with the preservation. Let's see. Snakes. Oh, somebody's talking about snakes. I'm not one of those that snakes don't. I don't want to get bit by a snake, but they don't freak me out. I've picked snakes up before. I'm not afraid of them in that way. I just don't want to get bit by one, especially if it's poisonous, especially if it's going to kill me. I don't want to get bit by one. But I made the mistake of picking up a garter snake one time, not realizing because they're relatively safe, but I didn't know that they secreted that nasty smelling. It smells like feces, and that's their protective thing. And it's like an oil, and it gets on your hands, and it smells so bad. But there's little snakes around here called yellow racers, I think red racers too. And they're just they're only like that long, and they're real narrow. Those ones are absolutely so safe. They don't bite you, they don't hurt you. They're so cool. And my kids have caught them a couple times. I don't see them that often though. And I know Justin caught one, and I let him keep it for the day. He actually carried around in his bib pocket because he wore overalls a lot. And it's like, okay, now we got to let the little guy go. It was pretty cute. So I'm not afraid of snake. I don't like spiders crawling on me, but I'm not near as terrified of them as I used to be. Jumping spiders, I don't mind. They're cute. And I used to have a pet iguana, by the way. So what else did we have here? Any other questions? Or chickens eat snakes? Yeah, I know chickens will eat all kinds of stuff like that. If they're not too big, they'll eat rats and mice too. Well, I don't know about full grown rats, but they'll eat mice and they'll eat baby rats. Pretty sure I saw one of my chickens a few years ago eating a baby rat. Or it could have been a mouse. I don't know. It was so quick. It just grabbed it and which is kind of nice. That helps keep that population down some. So chickens have lots of benefits besides just laying eggs and giving you fertilizer and tilling up your garden. So it's been great being able to finally let my chickens out front again, because they're getting my front yard garden area cleaned up. The only thing they're not doing is pulling up all that. I was looking at it a couple days ago. I'm like, oh my goodness, my stinging nettle is so far out into the main garden area where I put my potatoes. I'm like, because I didn't do anything last year. I just let everything rest. But that means I've got twice as much work to do to get all my stinging nettle back to where it belongs. So I'm going to be pulling up. Thankfully, the ground is super loose, so it should be pretty easy. I think just got to take a pitchfork or my garden fork and just kind of dig under it a little bit on the outside edges, and then just start yanking it up. And then I think that should work pretty well. The biggest bane to my garden in the front yard is the stupid chokeweed. Bindweed was the other word I was looking for. I think that's what they call it in the UK. It's a type of morning glory. It's pretty, but it wants to wrap around everything and choke it out. So it's so annoying. That's been the biggest issue I've had with any kind of weed that is pretty useless. So, but thankfully, I figured out I had that heal all or self heal in my garden last year by just letting things rest. I'm like, oh, now I know what this is. So I'm going to let a lot of that just stay and grow and harvest and dehydrate a bunch. I'm all excited about that. It's so nice when you can have a wild herb that is highly medicinal that starts growing in your garden out of the blue. It's like, where'd this even come from? I don't know. But now I've got it. And you think, you go through all this trouble to grow, to buy or collect all this medicinal herb seed that doesn't, especially for things like the mullein that doesn't commonly grow in your area. and you strive. I'm still glad I have the mullein. I have to say that I'm absolutely just thrilled. I have mullein now, but there's so many wonderful medicinals that are wild and they're often called weeds that everybody has no matter where they live. They're all going to be different and unique for each person's location, but everybody grows something in their area. Like most areas will find plantain and dandelion, but not all. There are some places that those things do not grow well, but there'll be something else that grows naturally and grows wild that, once you learn about these things, you realize, man, I didn't have to go through all the trouble of growing this or that, to get something that has these great benefits. Though it's still fun. It's still nice to have a selection. So if you've got, I always bring up the pain one because to me, that was one of the biggest ones. I wanted to make sure when I first started getting into medicinal herb gardening, growing medicinal herbs, I wanted to make sure I had some that were good for pain. So I started right off with the feverfew because I looked up, herbs that are best for this or that. And then also just kind of looked at lists of the top herbs and what they're good for. And so I'm like, okay, feverfew. But then I have other herbs that are also good for pain. And so it's good to have a selection because maybe what works best for you isn't going to work best for somebody else in your family or somebody else you're trying to help. And then also you can make blends, and blends, obviously with some people, you got to be careful with blends because if you got a blend that maybe something in there somebody's allergic to, you might not know it. But at any rate, having a blend can also help you go, okay, well, this herb for pain works best for this kind of pain, and this herb for pain works best for that kind of pain or whatever. I like making blends for us. So what's going on in here? Are you guys misbehaving again? Oh, we've killed 3 large timber rattlers last year. Yeah, we don't get rattlesnakes here because they don't like our damp climate. But where I grew up in Wenatchee, there were rattlesnakes up in the hills. So I remember one time my grandfather in Kashmir, he had this room, they called it the Blue Room. It's an old house. And that's where they kept all the just old stuff that he collected over the years. I'm not talking old antiques. Just so much. There was an old phonograph back in there. I was fascinated with that room. I'd just go digging through I could spend a whole day in that room just looking at all the great stuff, like the old-fashioned viewfinder where you put the big thick card in there and then you looked through that and you could adjust it to, for blurriness and all that. That was so cool. I could look at those same pictures again and again and again. But anyway, I found a box of rattlers that my grandpa had collected over the years because he was a gardener and he always get rattlesnakes in his garden and kill them and then keep the rattle off of them. I remember thinking that was pretty dang cool. And also rather brave. I think I'd be a little scared of that one. Anyway, well, guys, my throat is telling me, my vocal cords are telling me, you're done. So I should probably get going. Thankfully, we stayed on. We didn't get booted. And I am so appreciative that I didn't have to jump to my backup stream, but I'm glad I had it there just in case. So anyway, I hope y'all had a great day and have a great rest of your day. Thanks for dropping in. Thank you just for being there and all your comments and all your interaction and helping each other out. And yeah, take care and God bless. We'll see ya.